So in 1991, what you have is Yeltsin really trying to kind of create a post-Soviet Russian identity where there really isn't one, because Russia is quite difficult to. Russia has rarely been a nation state. There's the sort of famous quote that Britain has an empire, or had, but Britain has an empire, Russia is an empire, and that sort of sums it up. So it was quite difficult, but Yeltsin tried to almost externalize the Soviet, so that Russia Russia was not equated with the Soviet Union, and he failed at that. He failed because people did still, relate to the Soviet Union, and in particular, when it came to the Great Patriotic War. And so when Putin comes in, he almost immediately restores the Soviet national anthem that Yeltsin had got rid of, obviously with some new words, but essentially it's the same thing. And certainly from 2005 as well, he starts to really go quite heavy on the Victory Day parades, which are celebrated on 9th of May, but under Putin, actually to a certain extent under Yeltsin as well, but less so, become a really big thing. And, George Bush is there, Tony Blair is there, which, feels insane to think of now, UK, but watching Russian tanks on display, but there they were. And so it's already kind of getting started. And then in 2008, under Dmitry Medvedev, when he became president, before he drank so much as he does now, perhaps, there was a commission set up against the falsification of history, and this is sparked by riots in Tallinn in 2007 by Russians, by Russian speakers in Estonia, because they were upset that the monument was going to be. There's a monument to this unknown Soviet soldier, which was not popular, to put it mildly, among Estonians, that they wanted. The city authorities were moving to a local cemetery. So it wouldn't be in the center of the city, but would be, so it's not like they were going to destroy it or something. And there were riots, there were cyber attacks, which is why now Estonia is like a crazy cyber powerhouse within this. It's really great at cybersecurity.
I did not realize that.
but yeah. So it's all there. And then when Putin comes back in 2012, of course, he's very unnerved because there are a lot of protests against bluntly falsified elections to the Duma, to the Russian parliament, but also falsified presidential elections. And so what we see then is he needs more legitimacy. And the economic legitimacy that he previously had, because things were a lot better under him than they were in the 90s, that's running out because the economy isn't doing well. So it turns more to a sort of, well, I'm going to restore Russian great power. And of course, the pinnacle of this is Crimea, the annexation of Crimea. I was in Russia. I lived in Russia during this sort of whole period, and there were so many parties, just like Krim Nash, like Crimea's ours, just 3 days of just absolute, just getting drunk, to be honest. And people, and there was also a real popular demand for the annexation of Donetsk and Luhansk as well at that time, but for different reasons, the Russian government decided it wasn't in their interests.
Is this mostly staged, or were people at the time generally?
No, it was completely, including among people who, let's say my friends who, like, sort of from the gay community, who did not like Putin, but they were like, historical justice has been restored. Crimea is Russian. It should be ours. And this issue comes up as well in the 90s, but it's sort of resolved in different ways. But, and bluntly, I mean, the people of Crimea, they did vote to be part of an independent Ukraine. So as well, I think sometimes it's complicated.
Is there a real difference in Ukraine between people who are in the West and people who are in the East? It sounds like no.
Not
Okay.
now. Certainly not now. And I think the differences have been overstated anyway. I think the problem is people often think, oh, Russian speakers versus Ukrainian speakers. And it's really, the minute somebody brings that up, I know that they don't know anything about Ukraine. Because, for example, I'll just use an anecdote from yesterday. So I was at a barbecue with people who are ethnic Russians. Their first language is, they are Russian in that sense. And they all see themselves still as ethnic Russians, absolutely hate the Russian Federation. They have, fought, some of them are of different ages, so there's different things that's sort of appropriate. But, some of them had been at the front line fighting. The idea that they would become part of the Russian Federation, it was completely just despicable to them. It was horrific. And the idea that Russian Federation, that people from Russia would come and try to enforce their way of life, or that everybody speaks Russian on them, it was insane. And they'd spoken to many of their relatives back in Russia and said, "What on earth, on the 25th of February, what are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, well, don't worry, just wait a week. Sit there quietly, wait a week, and you'll be liberated." It's like, liberated from who? I'm Russian. I speak Russian. I don't have any problem with that, And these people often lived, in the West, not far, far West, but let's say like Rivne or Zhytomyr, these sorts of areas. And it's like, well, who are you liberating from? Oh, the Nazis. Like, what Nazis are you talking about? Then I'm a Nazi because I want to live just in Ukraine, just to live my life. Who are we? And that's the big thing. I mean, if it was an issue of liberating Russian speakers, Kharkiv city is probably 99% Russian speaking. It's, and well, they fought off the Russians.